Welcome to the conclusion of Service Management as a Practice. My name is Dr. Suzanne Van Hove, and I'll be your instructor. In this final topic here, we're going to be looking at specific service transition activities for RCV, really focusing on the transition planning and support process and how it interfaces with the activities of RCV. So we'll be looking at the strategy, the planning, and then we'll conclude with an exercise. Okay, so let's go ahead and jump right in. So when we look at these key aspects of transition activities for RCV, we're really looking at some of the project management-like components that are described in the transition planning and support process. So in these activities, we're going to discuss defining and following the transition strategy, preparing for that service transition, planning and coordinating that service transition, and providing that transition process support, and then thinking about the various planning and support roles. Again, this is from the transition planning and support process, so it underpins the activities within RCV. Okay, so first of all, that transition strategy. So transition planning and support is going to define that overall strategy and approach to the activities that are required to progress that SDP and create that new or changed service and make sure that it is now effectively, efficiently, risk mitigated, deployed into the operation. So we'll be looking at the activities and also resource allocation. So within that strategy, from a content perspective of what we're going to describe, we're going to be looking at the purpose, goal, objectives, context, and scope, typical contents of any point or any strategic document. We're going to look at the applicable standards. What can we learn from the international standards community? Be it ISO 20000, be it 27001, be it 19770. And that goes again around configuration management. So what standards can we utilize to create some efficiencies in our own transition activities within the service provider? What about legal, regulatory, contractual requirements? Understanding the impact to the stakeholders as well as the organization itself. Also within this strategy document, it's really going to describe the framework of the service transition. What's expected for different types of changes? Where are we trying to operate? What's our goals and objectives again? And it's also going to detail the criteria that's required to go from one stage to the next within a plan. So hopefully you're starting to hear, wow, that sounds like a stage review, a formal process that project managers will use and saying these criteria have to be met before we do that next set of activities. So again, additional contents to that strategy, it will be identifying the requirements and the contents of that new or changed service. How are we going to deal with the people? What approach will we take in terms of completing those activities within the strategy itself? And then also defining exactly what those deliverables will be. So that's our transition strategy. Okay, so as we consider that strategy, we also need to think about those life cycle phases that transition will go through. So when you think about entry and exit criteria or quality gates for each of the stages, consider the stages around acquiring and testing CIs, the build and test, the service release test, the operational readiness test, actual deployment, early life support, and then that close of the service transition. So as we prepare for the transition and we think of those life cycle stages within transition, they really matched up well, if you remember your foundation training, with release and deployment. They also refer back to that diagram that I like so much in the previous module when we looked at the life cycle activities and RCV. So as we prepare for that service transition and keeping those stages in mind, the activities that would include would be reviewing and accepting inputs from other life cycle phases. So what can they provide that will make this string of activities run more effectively and efficiently? We want to review and check the input for the deliverables and make sure that they're feasible. So in other words, if we had to order components, are we getting the correct ones? Are they compatible with our infrastructure? We want to identify and raise and schedule the necessary RFCs for each of the sets of activities as we go through that strategic plan. We want to make sure that we have the appropriate configuration baselines so that we don't have to start from the beginning if something disastrous occurs, that we can go back to a defined, tested, and accepted point and then move forward again with our plan. We also want to check the transitional readiness between the phases, making sure that groups of people, environments, test environments, pilot environments, that various environments are prepared and ready to go ahead and do their set of allotted tasks. So as we plan and coordinate that service transition, individual plans, they'll reflect the build and deployment stages that we'll discuss when we get to RDM. It'll follow some proven model and we'll adjust it for whatever the current change requirements have. That overarching plan that we're developing, it must coordinate with the supporting plan. So you think about, you have the master plan, and then you have various and sundry groups that are doing individual sets of activities. Test, deploy, pilot, evaluate, all of these. We must be able to have those defined inputs and outputs between the activity sets. The plan contents will describe the work environment, the infrastructure requirements. Those will come from the SDP. They'll come from the actual designs. They'll define the milestones, the handover and delivery dates. This has to be coordinated with change management and that change schedule. It will define the tasks and activities that need to be completed at a level of detail that is required for that type of change. More detail, more assurance that we're meeting all of the needs for those high risks or high impact type changes. The plan will also describe the staffing, resources, budgets, and timescales. Again, always going back up to the RFC that was submitted, going back through and coordinating with the timescales and resources with change management and other processes. We'll consider and ensure that we know those issues and risks. So when we're talking about this transition plan, it almost is going to mirror, as I sit here and talk about these different concepts, it's going to mirror parts of the release plan, as it should. Those two plans should coordinate and share information. Other elements of the plan should be lead times. How much time do we have to provide to various vendors so they can get equipment out, or maybe to various departments so that they can plan resources? And what are the contingencies in case those lead times are not met? This is all the responsibility of a service transition manager. Now, that service transition manager overarches all of service transition. We're going to talk about this role in a few slides, but understand we had a CSI manager that oversaw all of the activities within that CSI phase. Well, here we actually have a service transition manager that is overseeing those last elements. We have the design, now we have to get that newer change service out. And again, very, very much related to project management and that management and coordination of resource. So as that transition is progressing, we need to provide the necessary support. So transition planning and support process, what is it going to provide? Well, of course, it's going to provide guidance and advice. So what's the expertise and knowledge and experience that we can provide to make the next transition, either the actual activities, the strategy, or the planning activities, more effective and efficient? Administration. So completing the RFCs, making sure the work orders are in line. Talk about the countermeasures for managing risks, providing tool support. Again, we are the go-to individual, go-to process to make the transition run smoothly. Communication, huge. The level of transparency and coordination between the various groups is phenomenal, especially for that high impact or enterprise-wide change. We must have a communication plan, and of course that communication plan can be at least started through the various RACI diagrams you have describing the processes, but it would also be enhanced through the information that we would get from service level management, business relationship management, and understanding stakeholder expectations. The last support area that TPS would provide, transition planning and support, would be progress monitoring and reporting. So it'd be an ongoing assessment of comparing where we are, where do we need to be. So looking at the progress through the overall plan, providing updates in terms of what's the next activity, preparing the next groups, provide status updates, amending the plan as needed. Again, that plan would be amended, and it would seem to me that it would need to go back up into the change management process, at least in terms of informing, because if it affects the release date on the change schedule, we need to make sure that they are all coordinated. So the various roles. So first of all, we talked about that service transition manager that goes and oversees the entire phase of service transition. In some organizations, that is a single individual, and their responsibilities are made up of a combination of both the transition planning and support process owner and process manager. So understand that service transition manager typically will own the responsibilities, activities, accountabilities of the process, transition planning and support, TPS, process owner and manager. So remember that as we talk about the specifics of the process owner and process manager for TPS. So the process owner, so the generic owner and manager of the activities, so those generic activities that we discussed in Module 2, they'll set the scope and policies for service transition. They'll plan and design the service transition processes. The process manager, they'll manage and coordinate the necessary functions that will support the activities. They'll take care of the budgeting and accounting. They'll be the prime contact, the single point of contact for management. They'll coordinate and manage resource requests, work with vendors to ensure deliveries happen on time. They'll coordinate all of the service transition activities across the various projects and suppliers and ensure that that final product meets the customer requirements. So looking at the results of tests, what is rolled out, what has been accepted, and comparing to customer requirements. And that sounds a little bit like change evaluation, does it not? And some of the activities within change management. It's shared. So that process practitioner from transition planning and support. Now, the process owner, process manager tends to be that service transition manager. So do we have individuals that support and do the activities? Of course. So the transition planning and support process practitioner, they'll maintain the overall plans that were already created and documented with the process manager, process owners. They'll monitor the progress, monitor the risks, the issues, maintain the records, provide that communication source between stakeholders. So maybe doing a few more of the administrative features while the service transition manager is overseeing the entire life cycle phase. All right, so that concludes the information around the general concepts of service management and around the general concepts of service transition. So now's the time for the exercise, and we're going to look at an exercise around general service quality improvement. This exercise can be found in the exercise guide in that download section of the course page. So let's give you a little bit of background. We have a worldwide IT industry research has consistently pointed to the fact that poor change management practices are a major contributing cause to service failure. Other key contributors that relate to service failure are poor or non-existent configuration management and release and deployment management. So your assignment is to create a list of potential service failures due to inadequate implementation of the RCV processes. For example, the level of testing doesn't match the operational risk profile, thus the severity and impact of that failure is much greater than necessary. So that would be something that we could do for SVT. Once you've created that list, create a quick win list of how an organization could avoid or might avoid those listed failures, which in turn will improve service quality. The exercise that has been provided to you have a few more little hints and tidbits. There is a rather extensive answer guide for you once you are done with the exercise, but I encourage you to try the exercise first before you jump in and look at the answers. So I hope you have fun with it, and we will see you in the next module. Thank you.